Welcome to the ChargePoint podcast, brought to you by Flexecharge, your gateway to the future of EV charging. In each episode, we dive deep into the world of EV infrastructure, offering insights and perspectives from industry leaders, innovators, and the people at the forefront of deploying charging solutions and networks. Join us to explore the exciting developments that are accelerating our world towards sustainable mobility.
Welcome everyone to today's episode. If you are in the EV charging industry, you already know that navigating the complexities of grid access and infrastructure is one of the biggest challenges we face. But it's also an area full of opportunities for innovation and growth. Today we have the privilege of diving deep into this topic with a true expert, Zsuzsanna Pato, a senior consultant from the Regulatory Assistance Projects, or RAP, an independent global non-governmental organization with a mission of advancing policy innovation and thought leadership within the energy community. Zsuzsanna's most recent reports have been making waves in the energy sector, and for good reasons. Her insights into the gridlock in the Netherlands, the pitfalls of the first-come, first-served grid connection approach, and the urgent need for more transparency in grid operations are incredibly timely for anyone working in the EV charging space. We'll be exploring how these challenges and the innovative solutions she proposes impact charge point operators and charging professionals across Europe. So whether you're wrestling with grid congestions, looking for ways to maximize energy efficiency at your charging sites, figuring out how to future-proof your business, or where to roll out your network, today's discussion will give you actionable insights. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and let's dive in. Welcome to another interesting and exciting conversation with a leading voice from the energy and EV charging industry. Welcome, Zsuzsanna, to this seventh episode. Thank you for joining me. I've reviewed and discovered your three most recent reports, which really caught my attention and the team's attention. I think I was realizing how important and how crucial it is for professionals like us to understand the big, so to speak, system, right? The big picture that we're part of, the electricity or energy system, and those reports are certainly shedding lights on the, I would say, on the big picture. And in particular, the one about the gridlock situation in the Holland was really a starting point for a webinar which we organized some weeks ago about the challenges, opportunities, and solutions for CPOs to deploy high-power charging stations. So I'm really excited to hear more on those reports. Can you maybe introduce yourself to get started now?
Thanks very much for having me here. This is the first time I'm talking to an EV charger crowd, so that's a debut for me. My name is Zsuzsanna Pato. I work for RAP. RAP stands for Regulatory Assistance Project. This is an independent organization, global, works in the US, in Europe, India, and China. And this is an NGO, non-for-profit organization. And our mission is to provide policy innovation and thought leadership for the energy transition, mainly on regulatory issues.
Yeah, what did you do before joining
I live in Budapest. I'm Hungarian. I'm an economist, so I'm not an engineer. That's very important to know. Before, I worked in a very similar organization called REC, Regional Center for Energy Policy Research, and it's based in Budapest. It's again a think tank on energy policy issues.
All right, so that definitely makes you an expert within this area. So as mentioned, I've been looking forward to discuss with you the content of those reports and introducing them to our audience, which maybe some of them already know those reports, but most, I guess, would still have the joy to discover it and the benefits. So let's dive into the first report in chronological order, the gridlock in the Dutch market. So can you tell us a bit about the background for this report and why did you write it? And of course, what are the main findings?
Well, in the last 2 years, we increasingly learned, we read in the news all over in the globe that grids are getting to be bottlenecks in the energy transition, power grids, European power grids. So we had news from the US, from Brazil, from Australia, China as well, and also in Europe. And why I chose the Netherlands? Because first of all, I think Netherlands was the first country in Europe really hitting this wall of not enough grids. So now they actually calculate the GDP impact of not having enough grids, which is, I think, quite stunning. And the second reason was that it was the Dutch government who actually tried to come up with an overarching strategy to deal with this problem. And they listed several options, the NRA, the regulator, and the ministry together, to come up with solutions as quickly and as cheaply as possible to ease this scarcity of the grids. So I think they were the first movers to actually tackle it, and they came up with an all-in strategy with various options they would explore, and some of them has been implemented since then. While other countries are still like mulling over and picking one or two options, but not really an overall strategy for the grid. So I think that makes the Dutch government different to the rest. And they are hit hard, so.
Yeah, exactly as you said, particularly early and hard by this challenge. Just out of curiosity, so how did you go about it? Who did you interview? What did you research? How did it go?
Well, I mean, of course, I learned about this strategy, and I did a few interviews with DSO and TSO people in the Netherlands. And it turned out the first sign of grid congestion was in 2018, so quite a while ago. And they published this strategy December 2022. So it was not quick. Mm-hmm. But they already rapidly started to implement it. As I said, I call it an all-in strategy, like in poker. All the options, like quick changes in the network code, for example, about co-location of various resources behind a single connection point, but also longer-term reforms, rethinking, for example, the network tariffs regime. And I think now they announced that they are seriously considering to give network tariffs for generators as well, not for users. So, and also the way they process the applications, the connection applications in the Netherlands, which is very cumbersome, not only in the Netherlands, but in all the other countries. So that's a very, very slow process. Of course, the Netherlands is specific in some respects. I mean, they heavily relied on gas as far as heating concerns. I mean, they had their own gas resources, which they closed recently in the north of Holland. They have a huge housing shortage, so they are building new housing. And of course, that requires lots of new connection and new lines. And they have, there's a lot of interest in placing data centers. Data centers increasingly would like to locate close to offshore wind sites, which is understandable because that would be a lot of very cheap power for them. And the Netherlands is one of those countries. And there is one more peculiarity of the Netherlands is that it's the only remaining country who has net metering for solar, which means a very, very beneficial, very good business case to have rooftop solar. In fact, this is banned from 2024 in the EU. Holland is the only country and drives lots of rooftop solar. I mean, they have the highest per capita rooftop solar in Europe. Considering the climate, it's a bit odd, but you see, this is like the regulation that drives the market to a large extent. So they have lots of renewables, booming renewables. And, you know, the outcome was that in the medium and high voltage grid, like 60-70% of the area of the Netherlands, you cannot connect at all. So effectively, you won't get any connection permit in the majority of the territory of Holland in these voltage levels. Neither if you are a generator, that's a new renewable, a wind site or a solar site, nor a load. So that applies for both directions to the grid. And that's a huge problem for a country, especially that during the war, or after the war, sorry, you can cut this out. Especially that, the high gas prices caused by the Ukraine war triggered lots of existing industries in the Netherlands to stay away from fossil gas and electrify whatever industrial processes they can electrify. But of course, you need new connections or larger connections for that. So grids are also an obstacle in electrifying industry in the Netherlands. The expectation is that this grid connection issue will not be solved until 2030, even in the best case. So there will be a gap in the demand for grid and the available grid, even if they implement all these options which are on the table now.
Yeah.
So this is a lasting problem.
This is a lasting and serious challenge for electrification of the transportation industry where we are. And tell me, why do you think that this report is actually also relevant for professionals outside of the Netherlands?
So the tendencies are the same inside and outside Holland and outside Europe as well. So generation moves away from fossils, so we'll have renewables. The renewables will be located in different voltage level, different locations. So there is a switch in the generation asset. On the load side, we will electrify many processes, including transport, but also heating. So whatever has been run on gas or on oil, we'll move it to electricity. So the grid is under pressure both from the changing demand and the changing supply in the power system. So in the past, we built grid very granularly, and that was a very granular and nice process. But now it's more of an exponential process. So the demand for grid rapidly rises from year to another, and you can have a look at the queues. I mean, in many geographies, the amount of capacity in the queue waiting for connection is twice as much as the capacity already connected to the grid in the last several decades. So you could see how big the demand is. Even though, of course, we know that there are some ghost projects in these queues. So some, investors are fishing for various locations and they apply a connection request multiple times. So the Netherlands was the first one to hit the wall, but other countries would very, very soon get to the same situation. So it's better for them to be prepared because some of the changes takes time. Not only a few months, but maybe 1 or 2 years.
Yeah. So hopefully it's all the actors of the ecosystem, grid operators, system operators, as well as consumers like charge point operators that are looking into this crystal ball and try to prepare themselves for what's to come. Yeah. Very interesting. Great. Thanks. Again, all reports are available on the RAP's website. So you should definitely go there if you haven't downloaded. So let's move to the second report, which you titled Rest in Peace, First Come, First Serve. So can you tell us a bit about the background of this report, which actually is a big table with insights and recommendations. So again, why did you come up with this report and what are the main findings?
Well, first, maybe something about the title. At RAP, we have a competition for good titles, so you have to understand that. But what I wanted to express with this title is that the first come, first serve is the default connection regime in Europe. And that consists of 3 things. First of all, the first come is first serve. So basically there is a queue and the people who want or investors who want to connect are served on the basis of the time of the application. The second main tenet of this regime is usually there is one user behind one connection point. And the third one is that connection agreements are usually firm, which means that you have a 24/7 access to the grid at the grid connection level. So these are the 3 main tenets of the current regime. And I call it rest in peace because I think we have to ask the question for each of them, whether it's still tenable, whether it still serves our purposes, considering this huge pressure on connecting to the grid. So the second publication is a kind of a natural follow-up of the Dutch, because the Dutch government and the regulator, they listed the options they are thinking about to implement to deal with grid congestion. So the idea was actually to think beyond, maybe what are the options they haven't thought about. So that's one thing. And to make a generic table that can be used by any regulator or any government when they feel the need to do something about the grids, because they are scarce or they will be scarce in a few years. And to be able to have a look at these options, and I don't claim that I have all the options, but I have a huge list of options, and figure out what would actually have their own situation, because every country is different. What would be a suitable option for them, or what kind of cocktail of options would be suitable for them. And in addition, I collected examples for those regulatory options, places inside and outside Europe where these options has been used for the reason to ease the grid congestion. So there are examples. And the format, well, I don't think anyone reads long reports anymore. So this is just a table, very clear format. And the examples are just hyperlinks. So I don't write up the case studies because, things change very fast in all these places. So maybe in 2 months' time, there is new information there. Exactly. So anyone who wants to check, how it is done in the US or in Brazil or in Australia or in UK, just can go through the hyperlink and then check what's going on there. Because for the regulators, it's very, very important to see that something has been actually implemented somewhere else. The regulators are very risk-averse normally. So if it's just an idea, they don't really trust it unless someone else already implemented it.
Exactly. Can you maybe mention one notable example of implementation that could be quite inspiring?
I made 3 categories. So I tried to categorize these options. So one is, and it's a question for the regulator, how you allocate the remaining grid capacities? Because oftentimes you still have some remaining capacities. And the default regime, as I said, first comes, first served. But there are other options. We all know that the value for a connection is different for different users. So you could auction, basically, connection points. And this is something that has been done in the past in Portugal and in Turkey as well. And it's going to be the default regime for new transmission nodes in Spain. So basically, there is a connection capacity at a certain location, and you open up an auction. In the past, it has usually been done together with renewable support regimes, because the applicants, they were mainly renewable investors, so not users, not loads. So that's one option. The second big direction is how you can use the existing grids better. Of course, we know that we have grids at a certain peak capacity, but the utilization can change from very low to very high. If we can increase the average utilization of the grid, that would mean that these grids, they don't rest idle for a certain amount of time. So whatever makes the utilization rate higher, then that's good. So, and I will mention 2 main options. First is to give some sort of a signal for existing grid users to align with the availability of the grid. And the grid availability changes from hour to hour. Like in a power system, the price changes every 15 minutes. So if the users, they get a price signal, and they are to some extent flexible in how they use the grid, they can increase the overall utilization rate, and we will have less idle assets. The second one is we have certain technologies that enhance the overall capacity of the existing grids without actually having new wires and new transformer stations. And these are called grid enhancing technologies. Or in European discussion, we just call them usually smart grids. And this is a collection of various different technologies, but the outcome of using these technologies is that kind of you virtually enhance the available capacities of the existing physical assets. And usually they are linked to much better monitoring and real-time data, how the grids are in real time. And if the grid operator has this data, then basically they can enhance or they can allocate much more capacity for the users without risking resiliency and service quality from the grid. So in the past, in a very good example, the only way a DSO knew that one line is down somewhere in the city, if someone phoned that, look, I don't have power. They didn't have any monitoring on their grids. And of course, this is much more advanced at the transmission level, but the distribution level has to mimic what's already done in the transmission level and to have much better real-time information. So these are the grid-enhancing technologies. Dynamic line rating is the one which is mostly quoted. And the third one, no one actually denies the fact that even if we allocate existing capacities much more efficiently and we use what we have much better, we still have to build grids. I mean, this is a no-brainer. But the question is how you can make grid build-out quicker and as cheap as possible. And these are huge investments. And there are some ways or some options the regulator can think about. For example, contestable build. So it's not the TSO, regulated DSO, who usually build the grids, but someone else, a third party. And it has been used in the US for transmission. And it's, for example, the regime for offshore wind development in the UK. And another option for quicker build or an issue, a problem with building grids is social acceptance of new grids. I mean, local communities, they don't like to have grids, especially if they don't have anything in return. Some countries, they already try to come up with regulations so that local communities, they have some extra benefits because they host the grid. And this is the same for renewables.
Exactly.
But this is not well developed yet. So I think this is a very, very important avenue because if people don't sign up for the energy transition, it's not going to happen. And for the energy transition, we need grids, unfortunately.
You could imagine, maybe thinking out loud, that charge point operators could join forces with grid operators and offer advantages for the local communities and say, let's reinforce the grid in that area. And then you get a special prices when you're charging your EV at our stations. That's maybe a thought for joining forces. Okay, excellent. Well, good. So, Zsuzsanna, in your report, you advocate for rethinking the first come, first served approach. How do you envision policy reforms could maybe prioritize certain infrastructures over other demands on the grid? And in this ranking, so to speak, of priorities, where do you think EV charging infrastructures will end up? What are they up against?
Well, it's not about prioritizing certain infrastructures, it's prioritizing certain users of the grid because we have a single grid. But of course, the first come, first serve means that if you are first to apply, you're the first to get the available connection capacity. I already mentioned that you could do an auction. So then the ranking would be based on the willingness to pay. But there are other ways to change the first come, first serve, and that is based on social priorities. So governments or regulators could come up with so-called priority lanes, like in the airports, that certain projects would have priority access to the grid whenever they are available, also for new grids. So in the Netherlands, they are already discussing it, and I think the outcome is likely to be that certain hospitals or new housing. So these are the projects that the Dutch society and the Dutch government considers as a priority. Of course, other governments can put charging infrastructure in this priority list, but it's up to the government, and the government decision. Hopefully, they are aligned with the social priorities in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's interesting to see how it will be critical, it will be perceived. Again, if you think about transportation and reaching CO2 emissions targets, we need to electrify transportation, especially heavy duty. So they need to be, but hospitals, schools, and housings are also important. Yeah, it's a challenging work for the authorities for sure.
But it's a difficult choice.
It's a difficult choice, yeah. Okay, great. So let's look at your third report to finish the so-called transparent grid for all. So again, can you tell us a bit more how it came about as the third one in the row? Why did you decide to create it, and what are the main findings of this report?
Well, the grids are operated and built and maintained by the system operators, transmission system operators and distribution system operators. They are regulated companies, so the NRAs, they regulate them and try to mimic competition, but they are natural monopolies. So they know everything about the grid, and it's very difficult to know what's going on. In fact, even for a regulator, I would say that there is a huge information asymmetry between the grid operators and even the regulator. And now we have a multitude of new customers who wants to connect to the grid. And their access to grid data is very limited today in Europe and in other parts of the world as well. Why transparency is important? Because we will have lots of new users who make their locational decisions now. Renewables, electrolyzers, big ones, charging operators, especially megawatt-sized charging, like big ones, data centers, new industries who not electrify now, but already building on electrified processes. So they make their locational decisions now. So the big challenge is how you coordinate these individual investment decisions and the grid, which is a regulated national monopoly, because we have to co-develop the two together and as far as possible to match location-wise. So the transparency came to the picture because RAP has been advocating for the so-called hosting capacity map for years. And the reason is that these tools has been used in the US for years. Many states in the US. It's a compulsory thing. Even at the street level, you are able to see how much capacity there, for example, for a charging point. Not so much in Europe. There are a few TSOs and a handful of DSOs who provide these maps. So if you want to connect to the grid, you can actually have a map and see how much capacity you can connect where, how much time it will take, the lead time for the project, and in some cases also the cost. Sorry, I have to drink. And the immediate reason why we thought that this is a very, very timely topic is that transparency became a big issue in the European policy discussion as well. So there has been certain provisions in the Electricity Directive and regulation, but last year the Commission came up with the Grid Action Plan, which is not a new legislation, it's just to make sure that actually the legislation gets implemented. And one of the tasks for the ENTSO-E and the EU DSO entity, these are the Association of the System Operators, to come up with the minimum content of how a hosting capacity map should look like. So in the next few years, we will have hosting capacity maps covering of the whole Europe, ideally, with a minimum harmonized content. Why is it important? Just think about a charging point operator who wants to build a network across whole Europe and wants to figure out where to locate the charging points. And of course, there are many factors into their investment decision: land availability, land price, of course, mobility patterns. You don't need charging stations anywhere, but also availability of grid. It's a huge important factor in the investment decision. And if you don't know, if you don't have a map, you just try to fish for various locations.
Yes.
So hopefully this problem will be done very soon in Europe.
Yeah. I wonder, there are software specialized in helping CPOs to find locations. Maybe that's an idea for another episode, to invite one of those professionals to hear if they are using this kind of data. You could imagine that they will definitely dip their hose into the API or whatever will be available once those data of transparent data will be available. Yeah, that's very interesting.
I know. I also know about like third parties, private companies providing this service. I heard about certain companies in the US, and also I know some in France. But now, even if you don't have such a service provider to help you with your locational decisions, you should be able to do it based on the publicly available information that needs to be regularly updated by law, like quarterly, at the transmission level monthly. So that will be a public asset available to everyone.
And what's the timeline for this availability? I don't know.
Probably a few years.
Yeah.
But
yes,
a big question for this map, just think about Germany with 800 or 900 DSOs. Is it realistic that each of them, even the small one, they come up with their own software, their own platform, their own data collection processes and things like that? So I think implementation in some countries with a very fragmented DSO system that needs to be probably integrating more DSOs or larger areas. Otherwise, it would be
it will be a mess. It
a
will be a mess.
mess.
We can see that when we work with the German market and with the DNO control or DSO control solution. Yeah, again, they 800 different versions. So how do you uniform this? So it's the same issue. So, but if we link it back just to Holland, so because of the GoPax platform that they launched, right, some years ago, we had Peter, the CTO, ex-CTO from Stedin, in our webinar some weeks ago, talking about the GoPax platform. Are they more advanced in the Netherlands in terms of transparency on availability of the grid for any players, any actors?
Well, the GoPax platform is a matchmaking platform to ease grid congestion through flexibility.
Okay.
So it's not just a transparency platform, it's already dealing with, it's a congestion management platform.
Okay.
Whatever is advocated by the EU law and made mandatory is simply publicizing the available capacities on the grid in a granular form, of course, because otherwise there's no point.
Yeah, exactly. You advocate for integrating distributed energy resources like solar and storage to elevate grid pressure in this report. So how do you see CPOs incorporating those DERs into their charging sites? And what regulatory or financial support would make this more viable? If you have some thoughts on this.
Well, I can only talk about the grid perspective. I mean, there are two ways to think about the optimization of the grid. If you have one user behind any single connection point, then the whole integration and congestion management now is done by the distribution system operator. But co-locating various resources behind a single connection point, this is one of the tools which is used most widely or introduced in Europe, because then users of the grid behind the single connection point can optimize the use of that connection point among themselves. So this is a bit like outsourcing the role of the DSO to the grid users.
The grid users.
And sometimes it's proved to be very efficient. So these grid users, they, arrange their contracts, how they use among each other, they agree, and they can utilize that connection point to a much higher extent than they would do individually. This hosting capacity max, for example, would also potentially allow to show who is actually queuing, who wants to connect, what kind of resource, solar, wind, battery, charging operator, or another load, or the same location. So if you have information of what kind of resources are actually queuing at each location, you can matchmake, because the different profiles then can be very beneficial to have different profile users behind a single connection point. So for example, if you have lots of solar, to have a battery that eases and improves the use of the single connection point. If you have a look at the US and the new applications for the grid, majority now is solar and storage. It's not solar, standalone solar anymore at the utility scale.
They go together, hand in hand,
also,
matching.
Yes, because, and also probably it's a better business case for the investor to have a matching resource. Maybe he owns the same resource. For example, charging point operators can own their batteries next to the charging point, or even certain renewables, of course, depending on the location, if you have the land. You can improve your own business case depending on how the regulation is, what the grid tariffs are, what can you avoid having these resources in your own ownership, or you can team up with other companies behind the single connection point. So I think the good thing now in Europe that you have all these options and you can be innovative. Depending on which country you are, what the cost structures are, what the business case is, how much is the power price in the country, because that also differs a lot. And to come up with the solution that is best for you. But you need to know where there is grid capacity. Otherwise,
exactly,
it's not going to work.
But there's definitely room for great collaboration within the ecosystem, to succeed. That's very interesting. All right, great. Thanks again for this walkthrough of the third report, which again people can find on the website. So maybe as closing in and wrapping up. So I know ask you to prepare maybe some of your recommendation or suggestions if we look at the charge point operator in particular. Tell us a bit about what are your thoughts and recommendations for this part of the ecosystem with your knowledge.
Well, if I would be a charging point operator this year and next year, I would focus on the following questions. First, I would really follow what's going on with the development of these maps in the countries where you are interested in, and make sure also maybe involved in the European process, which is on now. What is the content you would need? What is the information, the type of information you would need to make optimal investment decisions? The second one is consider this co-location. Again, this is very country specific, but consider whether it makes sense to have your own storage or your own renewables. So this is my second recommendation. And the third one is consider non-firm connection contract. So maybe you have a very good location in terms of land, in terms of the demand for charging, but there is no or not enough grid capacity. And then you have the right to ask the system operator what kind of non-firm connection capacity is available, because sometimes you can actually bring forward your investment several years with a non-firm connection capacity, and it might be totally beneficial from the business point of view, because delayed connection, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, it has a huge opportunity cost for you, especially like connection point operator is a market activity. So maybe your competitors would actually take those locations, which are very good locations. So make sure that you think through whether a non-firm connection would do the job for you or not. The trade-off between connecting quicker with a non-firm contract.
Absolutely. I hope everybody has taken notes. Although I rewind and sharpen your pencil. Yeah, good recommendation. Very interesting, very inspiring, Zsuzsanna. I think that's it for today. I think we should let people discover the reports and read more. And we'll share Zsuzsanna's profile also in the show notes if you want to connect with her and discuss. RAP has a lot of other resources. So thank you very much, Zsuzsanna, for taking the time. And wishing you a great day. And we'll be in talk again, right?
Thanks very much for having me. I hope that was useful for the audience, the crowd. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Bye for now.
Bye.
What an insightful conversation. A huge thank you to Zsuzsanna Pato for joining us today and sharing her expertise on some of the most pressing grid challenges facing the EV charging industry. It's clear that CPOs are at the forefront of a major transformation, not just in electrification, but in how we think about grid access, energy management, and the future of sustainable mobility and energy. From understanding how to navigate grid congestion to seizing new opportunities with distributed energy resources, for example, Zsuzsanna's reports offer a roadmap for overcoming the hurdles that come with scaling EV infrastructure. I hope today's discussion has given you practical insight to apply to your own operations. As the EV ecosystem continues to evolve, staying ahead of these grid-related challenges is critical, and I encourage all of you to deep dive into these reports and take proactive steps to ensure your business thrives in this dynamic landscape. Thank you all for listening, and stay tuned for more episodes where we continue to explore the innovation and regulations that are shaping the future of EV charging. And as always, if you have any suggestions for future guests from the EV charging or energy sectors, feel free to drop us an email at hello@flexecharge.com. Until our next episode, take care and drive safely.